Everyone, welcome to the Right-Click Tools Kiosk Manager webinar. My name is Chris Muster. I'm the CTO here at Recast Software, and today I'm joined by Chelsea Euchster from our marketing department, as well as Marty Miller, our customer success manager. Marty's going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A, so if any questions come up throughout the webinar, you can use that Q&A button inside of the Zoom application to ask them, and Marty will try to get those answered for you. We'll also have an extended Q&A session with Marty and I near the end of the webinar. As far as what we'll be covering today, we're going to start off with some customer use cases. We recently sent out a survey to our customers to try to get a better idea of how they're using Kiosk Manager. And so we'll go over some of the results and hopefully generate some ideas of how you might use the feature in your environment. Then we'll cover some of the main features inside of Kiosk Manager and walk through a live demo where we apply some of the Kiosk Manager profiles to devices, and we can get a look at what the user experience is when you start applying those Kiosk Manager profiles. Then Chelsea will take us through some extra resources for getting started with Kiosk Manager on our website and in our doc site. And then we'll leave some time at the end for an extended Q&A session where you can ask any questions you want, and Marty and I will try to answer those live on the air here. So with that said, now Chelsea's going to take us through the results of that customer survey.
Yeah, so starting off with the use cases for Kiosk Manager. Number one is student computer labs, and that's mainly for administering state testing. We had a K-12 school district recently tell us that they save about 80 hours per week during testing because they're able to use Kiosk Manager to set computer labs to auto log in using a generic user and launch each testing browser versus manually logging into each computer and launching each browser. Other common use cases we found out are very popular: digital advertising, library kiosks, factory floor machines for manufacturers. A healthcare customer uses it within patient rooms. We also heard other education use cases, including for parents, either for surveys or registration stations. And we also heard use cases for hourly employees, including benefits kiosks, as well as time clocks. So with that, hopefully that generates some ideas of how our customers are using the tool. With that, I'll hand it back over to Chris, and we'll dive into a walkthrough.
All right, thanks, Chelsea. So now we're entering demo mode. So I have a Recast demo environment here spun up, and I've got 3 virtual machines open. One with a ConfigMgr console, and then 2 kind of kiosk devices that are just here with fully blown Windows 10, and they're not set up for kiosk mode right now. They're just you log into them with Control-Delete. And so in order to use Kiosk Manager, you can either right-click on a device or a device collection and come under the right-click tools area, and under Kiosk Manager, you can see all of the actions that we can take that are related to kiosks. And from those first 4 actions in the list, you can kind of see that everything in Kiosk Manager revolves around profiles. And a Kiosk Manager profile is basically a bundle of settings that are related to kiosk management features that you apply to a device, right? These are things like automatic login, shell replacement, that we'll get into in a little bit. And then here at the bottom, we also have 2 kind of scheduled task areas so that you can view when you've scheduled a profile to be deployed in the future. You can use those to view the scheduled tasks as well as the results. And we'll go on deep on all of these in a bit, but to start, if you're new to Kiosk Manager, the first thing you'll want to do is come into Manage Profiles here. And this will bring up our profile window. And before I get too deep into this, full disclosure, everything you're seeing here is from the 4.2 release branch, which isn't out yet. So some of the stuff might look a little bit different than if you tried to run this in your environment, but we will be releasing 4.2 in April. So this will be in your hand shortly. So this is the Manage Profile screen. And up here at the top, you have some buttons to get started. You'd probably start with the new profile, right? Default, this would be empty. I've pre-created a couple of profiles here to help make this webinar a little bit easier. But step one, create a profile. That'll add a new one to the list, and then you can select it and click the next button to start configuring that profile. And the first screen we see when we start configuring the profile is basically a screen to select which bundles of settings we're interested in configuring for this profile. Right, so we see automatic login, shell replacement, restart on idle, delete files, internet allow list, keyboard remapping, and audio volume. And you can deselect different areas in the profile for things that you're not interested in configuring. For this demo, I'm going to select everything, and we'll kind of walk through every setting that's available together. And then I'll walk through some example profiles that are probably a little bit closer to how you might use Kiosk Manager. So the first setting in a profile is the automatic login setting. And this is a way for you to configure a device on reboot to log into Windows with a specific user account. And typically you would specify a user account that is, has pretty low privileges in the environment, right? Since this is automatically logging in, you wouldn't want this account to have admin access. You probably don't want it accessing any network shares in your environment. So, typically you would use a special purpose user account for this that you haven't given any extra privileges to in your Active Directory. With that said, you can also use local accounts, right? So if you specify a dot here in the domain field, that'll configure it to use a local account if you have the same local account across multiple devices. For this demo, we have a domain account called idle login. So you just enter the domain username and password. You can test the login to make sure that you haven't made any typos in the username and password. Under advanced here, we have the ability to limit login count. So if I applied this profile and if I only wanted it to auto log in for 1 or 2 restarts, I could configure that down here, right? And just specify the number of restarts I want to give it. I'll leave it at the defaults for now, though. On the next screen, this is the replace shell screen. And I would say that this is where most of our customers see value in this tool. And what this does is it replaces the Windows desktop experience with one or more applications, right? So when you apply a profile with this configured, typically you'll configure it in a way that they won't even see like this taskbar. Explorer won't even launch. It'll just launch an app either full screen or in a windowed mode or something. So down here we have a list of applications we can launch. We have 3 web browsers and the Win32 application option. And I'm just going to go ahead and add all 3 of those real quick so we can get an idea, or all 4 of those, and we'll get an idea of what the differences are between them. One thing I want to note, and this is a little bit different between 4.2 and the version we have out. If you check this Launch Windows Explorer box, you're also going to get access to the UWP application option. So I'll leave that checked, and we'll walk through that as well. So starting things off with Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, and Firefox, all 3 of these kind of look the same, right? They have the same settings to configure across the web browser, or the 3 web browsers. And some of the things you can do, you can configure a launch URL, right? So this is what website do I want this browser to launch into? In this case, I might choose our website. Or if you're doing state testing, you might choose some sort of Pearson website or something like that. I can choose to enter the browser into kiosk mode, which is kind of a full screen mode. It gets rid of some of these window border options, right? So you can't minimize, close, maximize the browser. It kind of looks like a single purpose application when you do that. I can choose to enable private mode, where none of the cookies or anything like that is saved locally. This is a good option for scenarios where you want to launch a web browser, but let the user have more control over the sites they visit, right? Think of like a student library or something where students might log in with their Gmail account, and if they walk away, on restart, we don't want those credentials saved in that browser. So that might be an area where you check this box. Or again, for state testing, right? If you don't want cookies to cross sessions on that auto login profile, you might check this box. The delay feature was put in for apps that are not aware of internet connectivity. So this is really for scenarios where we don't want to launch the app before the network is configured, right? So this lets us inject some artificial delay before we launch that app. So we make sure DHCP finishes its process before we launch that app. And again, this is mainly put in place for apps that aren't aware of internet connectivity. You notice, we've set this to 0 milliseconds for Chrome and Internet Explorer because they are aware when Windows changes its network connectivity state. But for Firefox, for example, we set it to a default of 2 seconds because it is not aware of these type of network changes. And that's actually available for any of the application types, right? We have that same delay. Continuing down the web browser list, we have a Windows style dropdown, and this is basically determines how that web browser is going to launch, right? So we can launch it in a normal window as if I came down here and clicked the button. We can launch it maximized, so it'll look like that. We can also launch it minimized or hidden. And these two might be for more background apps that you need to have running, like maybe some monitoring app or something like that. But typically we mostly see people using normal and maximized here. And then we have an option for close behavior. So what do you want to happen when the user closes the app, or if that application crashes for whatever reason? We can either ignore it, do nothing. We can try to relaunch the app with the same parameters that we used on restart. We can reboot the machine, or we can shut down the machine. So that's kind of up to you there, what you choose. And again, we have those same sets of options for Internet Explorer and Firefox. For Win32 apps, this is for scenarios where you want to launch your own application inside of that shell replacement scenario, right? So you want to get rid of that default Windows experience, but you still want to be able to, but you want to replace it with something other than a web browser. This is where you would use that Win32 app. We've had our customers use this for K through 12s. They've put in the Respond as lockdown browser in here since we don't have direct support for that browser. You can specify alternate web browsers here. Chelsea mentioned time tracking apps. That's another great use case. Up here on the path, it's basically browsing to where that executable exists, right? So I might choose like Notepad, for example. Come under System32 and Notepad. And then this would launch the Notepad application. I can specify any command line arguments here. So I might have a text file that I launch or something like that. And again, these command line arguments are specific to the app. So you probably want to make sure you test those in from a command prompt before launching it, right? So notepad.exe and then path to text file. We have that same delay option, again, for apps that are unaware of network connectivity changes, as well as the Windows style and close behavior options here. And then the last application type is the UWP application type. And this application type is for Windows Store apps. And so if you click on this top dropdown, you see a list of all the Windows Store apps that we have on this machine. So for this example, I might choose like Netflix. When you choose that, you get some apps will have multiple user models. You'll just have to test and choose the right one. These names are not provided by us. These are kind of the Windows internal built-in names. You can specify any additional command line arguments for that app, as well as provide a delay here. All right, now jumping back up to this top area here, we have a couple of checkbox options. So this allow sticky keys option is basically trying to configure that sticky key setting in Windows. So if I press Shift in rapid succession, we get these kind of sticky keys windows here. I probably pressed it too many times. And that checkbox is really just preventing that from popping up. And we try to disable sticky keys by default. We have this Launch Windows Explorer option. Again, some of the options are unavailable unless you check this box, right? Including that UWP option, as well as you'll notice these two options kind of gray out when we have that box unchecked. These do require Windows Explorer to be open, and these last two checkboxes are more experimental kind of features. If you like what you see there, or if you're interested in kind of the what those features are trying to do, please give us feedback on those, and be interested in seeing what areas you would see of use for those. But this tile windows option is basically trying to make all of the apps that you've selected here, right? So here I have 5 apps, basically take up the entire screen, right? So it's kind of like this feature, right? So launching things side by side so they take up the entire screen. That's the goal behind that tile windows feature. And then the remove window borders option will try to remove any of this, minimize, maximize, close option, title bar at the top. One thing to note that this option doesn't work for every application, so you'll definitely want to test that before enabling it. All right, moving on to the next screen. We have a restart on idle configuration. This allows you to configure the device to restart should a user walk away from it, right? So to me, this is really the library scenario, right? So we have a lab of computers that any user is able to sign into. If the system is idle for 15 minutes, maybe we want to restart to prevent them from, again, leaving any Gmail sessions open or anything like that. Really trying to protect that user privacy. Or if we've configured like the unified write filter on that device, we want it to wipe on reboot. That's another good option there too. And here you can configure it for just the auto login user, as well as configure it for all users of the system. This next screen kind of utilizes that restart on idle feature. So we have the ability to delete files and folders on restart. And we have a couple of predefined ones for the auto login user. So, for example, maybe you want to wipe the auto login user's downloads folder on reboot because they're just taking up space that you don't really need, or the temp folders. You can, go ahead and add those to the list, as well as your own custom paths too, right? So I could say like, wipe some custom folder on the device. This does, these folders do support environment variables as well as wildcards. But they are running in the system context, so that's something to keep in mind. So you can't say like I want to delete the user's profile on reboot or something like that. If you're looking to do something like that, I would recommend utilizing the unified write filter to kind of work on that. The Internet URL allow list allows you to block any websites that aren't in the list below, and we have kind of a Pearson profile because this was really designed around K through 12 state testing originally. And down here, I've actually added that Pearson profile. So we see, a list of websites that are allowed in that if I were to apply this profile. And, things to note here, we do support wildcards, right? So any subdomain of testnav.com will be allowed in this, as well as, your own custom sites, right? So I think I launched Recast software on one of them. I could add that to the allow list to make sure that that thing actually is able to go to that website. One of the gotchas here is that it's important not only to add the domains of the sites that you want your users to visit, but also any domains that those sites utilize resources from, right? So one common area we see issues with is someone adds a domain to the allow list, but it's grabbing resources from some CDN somewhere. Well, you probably have to add that CDN to this allow list in order for the site to have full functionality. So just something to keep in mind. You can disable keyboard keys on the keyboard. So this, here we've added the left alt and the right alt to prevent that control alt delete behavior from happening. But we have a number of keys that you can disable in the list here. And it's just a matter of selecting it and clicking disable. And then finally, we can configure the audio volume, right? So if you're in a library setting, maybe you want this muted. If you're trying to deploy some digital signage devices, you want to grab some attention, maybe you turn the volume up here. So once you're on the final screen, you hit finish to save the profile. And then once you have your profile saved, you can start thinking about applying it. So let's walk through the apply process now. So to apply a profile, you just come under right-click tools, Kiosk Manager, and apply profile. This will bring up a very similar looking window where we can choose the profile that we want to apply. In this case, I'm going to apply this Pearson testing one to this single device. Depending on your right-click tools configuration, this screen might change a little bit. If you're connected to a Recast management server, you'll have the option to schedule the deployment in the future. So here you can pick a start date for when you want to start applying that profile. You have to give it a task name so that you can identify it in the future. And typically, I'd recommend giving it a name that matches the profile that you're deploying. You can specify an end date if you don't want the profile. Like if you want to apply this profile every day at a certain time for a week, you could set this out to like the 25th, and then a repeat interval, right? So maybe I want to apply this every 24 hours. Get numlock on, and it'll be a little better. You can do that as well. For this example, I'm just going to apply it right now to Kiosk O1, and we'll kind of see what that looks like. So while that's applying, I'm just going to bring up the Manage Profile screen just so we can see what it's trying to do while we wait for that to apply. You can see it is applying now, so we can see that it's actually rebooting here. So coming back to Kiosk O1, I'm just select the Manage Profile screen. I'm going to select that same Pearson profile. You can see I've configured it for auto login, so we can see it logging in with that auto logon account. On the next screen, we can see that I've set it to launch Google Chrome and set it to this Minnesota Test Nav web page here. I've set it for kiosk mode, so we can see that it is kind of this full screen window. We don't really have any options to browse to different sites or anything like that. And I've also set it for private mode, so that no session state is being saved here. I've configured the URL allow list for these 6 sites. And again, those were added by using that Pearson profile. I've disabled the left and right alt keys, so if I hit Control Alt Delete here, nothing's actually happening on the device. And then I've configured the volume to be muted. So that was pretty easy. It was sitting at the Control Alt Delete screen. I applied the profile. Now it's in this kind of kiosk session. If I wanted to remove that profile, I can come under Kiosk Manager and remove profile, and I get a very similar screen to the apply profile, right? I can choose to either remove the profile immediately or schedule removal in the future. In this case, I'll remove it right now so that we can see it reboot and go back into that full Windows desktop experience. So it'll reboot, it'll go back into the Control Alt Delete screen, and as soon as it does, we'll log into it just to show that we actually do have the Windows desktop back to us again. while we're kind of waiting on that, yep, so there it is again. We can kind of walk through a couple of different other options that we have available, right? So we get a lot of questions on UWP apps, and full disclosure, this probably doesn't work as well as it oughta in the current version. This is getting fixed in 4.2, and just to show that, we'll just deploy this UWP app to Kiosk O1 again. This is basically just auto logging in and launching Netflix. So on reboot, we should see it auto log in, launch a UWP app. Pretty straightforward as far as what it's doing. And again, we're configuring the audio volume to max because we want to hear our Netflix if we're watching it. All right. The last bit I want to show is the ability to deploy multiple apps simultaneously. Actually, not the last bit, but I'll demo that real quick. I'm gonna apply that to Kiosk O2 real quick so we can kind of get two of them going simultaneously. And this is this is actually using that experimental tile windows feature. So we should see when this deploys, two apps launch side by side. Two Notepad apps launch side by side. And you can see here on Kiosk O1, we have our Netflix window open. So our UWP app did end up launching for us. And on Kiosk O2, we'll start to see our device reboot and go into that multi-app environment. If you're ever curious about which profiles you've applied to a device or a device collection, you can actually use the applied profile status feature in Kiosk Manager to see that. So if I come under Kiosk Management or Kiosk Manager and go to Apply Profile Status, I'll actually get a view of the profile that's applied to the device, as well as any settings that are applied. Right, so I can see, I have this this auto logon user applied to Kiosk O1. I've told it to launch UWP app, and specifically I've told it to launch Netflix, and then I've configured the audio volume to max. And when you launch it on more than one device, you get a list of devices over here on the left. And you can see I have the date that I applied it, as well as which profile I applied to that system and the status. So here we have our Notepad windows opening up in the multi-app setting. And then lastly, I just want to go over the scheduling experience. Scheduling, as I mentioned before, it does require a Recast management server to configure. It also requires that you set up a Recast proxy to make that fully functional. And that basically in older versions of Kiosk Manager, our scheduling experience was that you could specify a user account to run the actions as. In 4.0 and later, all of the scheduled actions actually get routed in the same way as other actions to one of your proxies based on the routing rules that you've set up. So in this example, I'm gonna schedule the Pearson lab to Kiosk O2 here, and I'm just gonna put it for a little bit in the future here. I'm gonna do 12:32 with 0 seconds. I'm gonna give it a name. We'll call it Pearson. And I'm just going to have this go, every couple of minutes here, right? So this is kind of simulating like a test day where I want my lab to boot into a Pearson profile at one time and then boot out of it at another time. So I'm going to actually schedule Kiosk Manager rollback on a remove profile action on Kiosk O2 as well. So I'll schedule it. I think we did the last one at 32, so I'm going to do this at 33. We'll call it remove, and then again we'll have this run every 2 minutes. And so every other minute it'll apply the profile and then get back out of it. So we can see it's already started going, started applying this profile to this device. If we ever want to, I mentioned we can see the scheduled tasks or things we've scheduled in Kiosk Manager using the scheduled tasks option. And when I bring that up, you can see that we have the 2 scheduled tasks I've created, as well as the settings we've created them for, right? 12:32, 12:33, repeating every 2 minutes with no end date. So these will just go on indefinitely. And you can see here, we've hit 12:33, and now it's signing back out and rolling back into that full Windows desktop experience. If you ever want to see the results of those scheduled tasks, so there's kind of 2 ways you can do it. The first way is with this scheduled task results window. This is going to, again, list all the scheduled tasks that we have, as well as all of the run dates for them. Right, so you see here, we've only got the 2 run dates. You can see that it was successful for each of those. Since that does require a Recast Management Server, you can actually come up here to your Recast Management Server web UI and take a look at the audit log. And basically, anything that's scheduled on the Recast server, anything that's not run by a user, ends up showing up in the audit log as this IIS app pool account. So we can see, we have 2 actions show up here: apply profile, rollback profile, and we can view the results of those as well. You can see that we successfully applied a profile to Kiosk O2, and we applied the Kiosk Manager webinar Pearson profile. All right, the last one, a little bit I want to cover is Microsoft Edge support. So we get that question a lot. You support Internet Explorer. Do you have any plans to support Edge? We do have plans for it. Unfortunately, we don't have it in the product today. But I did want to show an example of how you might set up that Edge profile inside of Kiosk Manager when we don't have support for it. So here I've selected this survey profile, which is actually going to launch Microsoft Edge, and I'll just show you what that looks like. So again, I have an auto login profile configured, and I have it just configured to launch Microsoft Edge with kiosk mode and a survey URL. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that, and we'll see Kiosk O1 reboot into the new Microsoft Edge. Note that this is not the UWP application. This is the Chromium-based Microsoft Edge. So we'll just wait for that to reboot here, and it should pop up with a survey in Microsoft Edge, which again is another use case we get a lot, right? So you maybe have a bunch of kiosks to ask for feedback or anything like that. In this case, we're actually launching a survey for Kiosk Manager, and I think Chelsea's going to talk a little bit more about that. Or specifically a survey about the webinar here. So we are doing something a little bit different with this webinar, right? Normally, when we do these types of webinars, we're talking about feature releases, right? 4.1, 4.0 type of webinars. This one's a little bit different than that, and we are still going to do our 4.2 webinar sometime in April. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I think we're done with the walkthrough and demo. I'm going to hand this back off to Chelsea so that she can take us through some of the extra web resources that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So Kiosk Manager is part of our enterprise suite of tools, and customers interested in getting started can check out our documentation site. We have a deep dive on Kiosk Manager specifically with screenshots and how to get started. If you have additional questions or need help getting started, you can head to our website, and under our support page, you have the option to submit a ticket or schedule a call. And then community users that are interested in getting 30 days free of enterprise tools, including Kiosk Manager, That's if you didn't already have a free trial with 4.0 or 4.1, you can get 30 days free by downloading the tools on our site. Just fill out the form and you'll get access. And if you like what you saw today, you can also get a price quote for your environment. You can simply request that from our site as well.
Thank you everyone for attending. If you do have questions after the webinar, please reach out to us. We'll try to get those answered.